Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take on complex, high-stakes challenges and distill them into essential knowledge that makes you feel immediately better informed.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in what is, well, it's universally recognized as one of the most demanding challenges in the modern military landscape.
And that is leading forces from multiple nations.
Right, where the fundamental power structure, that traditional command authority, is often constrained, diluted, or in some cases outright absent.
That really is the core paradox, isn't it?
Well,
We're moving so far beyond a single national chain of command where, an order is an order.
it is.
We're talking about coordinating actions, equipment, doctrine, and just.
Yeah.
The fundamental worldviews of troops from different continents, different cultures.
So the real question becomes, how does a commander achieve mission success when they can't simply issue a binding order to everyone on the battlefield?
Exactly. It stops being a clear hierarchy. It becomes, well, it feels more like a contest of influence, of alignment, and shared vision.
And cultural intelligence, that's key. This is not just a tactical issue, it's a profound strategic leadership problem.
So for this deep dive, we're drawing on some foundational principles from, let's say, advanced military instruction on this very topic.
Yes, and our mission today is to really unpack the cultural, the doctrinal, the procedural, and of course, the human factors that a senior commander has to master to effectively influence and, well, command a multinational force.
And this isn't just theory. This is about taking an operation that might even be starting from a position of defeat with diverse and maybe even reluctant partners and moving it toward success.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's unpack this heavy stack of sources we've got here. First up, we have the framework document on operations. That's Field Manual 316, the Army and Multinational Operations from July 2024.
That gives us the hard doctrine, the structural framework.
Then we're pulling in the human dynamics context from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization research reports.
Right, specifically the Human Factors and Medicine Research Task Group documents. We're focusing on chapters 1 and 3 there, which really get into collaboration challenges and the leadership context in these allied operations.
And crucially, the engine room of our discussion today. You really can't talk about this topic without it. It's the seminal work of Dr. Hofstede.
Of course. Dimensionalizing cultures, the Hofstede model in context. You absolutely cannot understand the dynamics of multinational operations without grasping his dimensions. They really are the map to the human terrain.
So with all that, we have a big question that's going to guide us, and it's really the ultimate measure of influence.
And that question is commitment, a deeply held shared belief in the mission, the highest achievable level of influence? Or, must a commander sometimes settle for mere compliance?
Just superficial adherence driven by necessity.
Exactly. We're going to explore how senior leaders are expected to achieve that deep commitment by understanding and, more importantly, appealing to the underlying shared values among all these different partner nations.
And that distinction, commitment versus compliance, that's everything. It's what separates a truly unified force from just a collection of temporary partners. Okay, let's jump right into the context and the structure of these operations. This need for multinational leadership isn't a new phenomenon.
No, not at all.
But its sheer frequency seems to have just exploded following 1990, that whole post-Cold War shift.
That's a pivotal turning point. You see it recognized throughout all the source materials. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the number of military operations requiring forces from multiple nations has just increased significantly.
So it's become the default setting for any major international military action.
It really has. And the missions themselves have broadened dramatically. It's no longer just focused on, traditional large-scale combat.
Right. The Human Factors in Medicine report highlights that. It says missions now include everything from peacekeeping and stability operations to, complex peace support and humanitarian relief.
And that requires completely different skill sets and, crucially, different political agreements. This broadening of mission types, coupled with the increasing frequency.
Well, it's precisely why the study of these intercultural factors is now absolutely essential for military effectiveness.
The sources are all pretty clear that this trend is not going away. This is the future standard.
It is.
So if that's the environment, we need to clearly define the two main operational structures. The Field Manual 316 uses multinational operations as the collective term.
Right, for military actions conducted by forces of two or more nations, and these actions usually fall into one of two buckets, an alliance or a coalition.
And the distinction between those two seems critical for a commander. It affects everything, from trust to political leverage.
It really does. an alliance that comes from a formal, long-standing agreement. Think broad, long-term objectives.
Like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Exactly. The political foundations are deep, they're established. So an alliance offers military planners, greater political resolve, a commonality of aim, and generally higher levels of procedural and technical interoperability right from the start.
Okay, so then on the other side, you have a coalition.
And that's formed for a limited short-term purpose. The goals are strictly defined, they're bounded in time, and they're often focused on a specific, immediate crisis.
And this is where the planning challenge must just ramp up intensely.
Oh, it does. The manual notes that a coalition requires significantly more diligence and political care from military planners.
Why is that?
Well, because the mutual goals arise from temporary sort of transactional situations, so short-term political considerations. Things like immediate national interests, domestic politics, public opinion back home. They have a much greater, often an overwhelming influence on coalition partners.
So every nation involved is constantly weighing the costs and benefits against their own immediate policy goals. And that political fragility leads us right to the core structural problem for any multinational commander: national sovereignty.
That's the immovable object.
Yeah.
The field manual is absolutely unequivocal on this. In multinational operations, a traditional military commander's authority is fundamentally reduced.
And it's reduced because the commander's subordinates, even if they're under the tactical control of the multinational commander.
They remain ultimately responsible to their national leadership. They operate with national caveats, and those caveats dictate the limits of their participation.
So you can't just use the traditional legal power of command, that binding code of service discipline. It doesn't apply to allied forces outside your own ranks.
Exactly. The commander has to get the mission done through coordination, communication, and consensus. The core mantra for all these operations is this: when achieving unity of command is impossible, the commander must instead fight to achieve unity of effort.
Making sure that even independent actions are all pointing toward the same common objective.
That's the goal.
To help us visualize this immense leadership challenge, the source material points to a really powerful historical example: Lieutenant General William Joseph Slim in the Burma campaign.
It's a superb case study. It encapsulates every challenge we're talking about. Slim wasn't just tasked with victory. He was tasked with rebuilding a fighting force, the 14th Army, from a mix of allied nations, British, Indian, African, Chinese.
And with inadequate resources, facing logistical nightmares.
And coming off a string of crushing, demoralizing defeats. And he didn't have the legal or political authority to just compel all those forces to follow his orders without question.
So he had to lead through sheer personal influence.
And cultural empathy, and an unwavering commitment to the welfare of his troops, no matter where they came from. His success was in appealing to shared values, honor, resilient survival, and delivering a common, compelling vision to forces with profoundly different cultures.
It's a perfect example of that transition from a mindset of command to one of influence and persuasion.
Turning inadequacy and defeat into victory through leadership. That's the art of it.
And that transition from relying on your rank to relying on influence, it perfectly sets the stage for our next section. If you can't rely on a legal code, you have to rely on psychology and culture.
So how do you even begin to map this complex human terrain, especially when you're dealing with partner nations you may have never worked with before?
And this is where we have to bring in the foundational framework. We have to talk about Dr. Hofstede's dimensions. This isn't just theory. It's a commander's universal tool set for analyzing the deeply rooted behavioral tendencies of their allies.
It's a way to understand why people in different nations prefer certain ways of, well, organizing society, leading, managing risk.
Right. And we have to emphasize, as the source material does, that these dimensions reside in often unconscious values. These are broad, deep-seated tendencies to prefer certain states of affairs, and they exist at the societal level, not just in individual personalities.
So we're really looking at a kind of national software, the deeply embedded programming that affects decision-making from the top general all the way down.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, let's break down the 5 core dimensions that are most relevant to military planning. Let's start with number 1, power distance.
Okay, power distance. This measures the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country accept and even expect that power is distributed unequally.
So it's about the amount of respect and deference that's expected between superiors and subordinates.
Exactly. It defines the preferred distance between the general and the private. In a high-power distance culture, you see more autocratic leadership, strict adherence to hierarchy, and, well, very little expectation for subordinates to challenge or even question decisions.
The military implication there is huge. A commander's preferred leadership style is directly tied to this,
It is. If a commander from a low-power distance culture, say the United States or a Nordic country, tries to implement a philosophy like mission command,
which requires subordinates to exercise disciplined initiative.
right, to make decisions without explicit approval. If you try to do that in a high-power distance culture, you have to know that such initiative is culturally unnatural. It might even be seen as insubordination.
And I imagine it affects feedback, too.
Profoundly, in high-power distance cultures, subordinates are often culturally programmed to only deliver good news to superiors, which can have a disastrous impact on intelligence and feedback loops in a fast-moving operation.
Wow. Okay, the second dimension is uncertainty avoidance. This sounds like it's about how cultures deal with risk and the unknown.
It is. High scores in uncertainty avoidance, often seen in East and Central European, Latin, Japanese, and German-speaking countries, indicate a culture that is inherently uncomfortable with ambiguity. They demand clear rules, detailed procedures, rigid planning.
They want stability to mitigate risk.
They seek the comfort of a detailed, pre-prescribed plan, and if that plan breaks down, they might experience a kind of institutional anxiety.
Whereas lower scores, you see those in English-speaking, Nordic, and Chinese countries, they show a much greater comfort with ambiguity.
Much greater. A reliance on implicit understanding, a willingness to embrace risk and adapt on the fly with minimal guidance. The implication for a commander is enormous. This dimension directly influences their approach to risk assessment and their decision-making tempo.
A high uncertainty avoidance culture might just stall if they don't have a procedure for an unforeseen event.
They might, waiting for new specific orders before acting, and that can be fatal in a tactical environment.
Okay, dimension 3, individualism versus collectivism. This seems particularly important for understanding multinational teamwork.
It's arguably the most fundamental dimension for staff interaction. It describes whether a person's identity is defined by personal goals and achievements, that's individualism, dominant in the West, or by the character and welfare of their group, which is collectivism, more dominant in the East.
And the validation research here gives us a really simple but crucial operational takeaway.
It does. In individualistic cultures, task prevails over relationship. In collectivist cultures, relationship prevails over task.
That one statement has profound implications for everything from planning meetings to assigning missions.
Absolutely. If you're leading a collectivist unit, spending time building rapport, sharing meals, engaging in social ceremonies, that's not a luxury. It's not a delay. It's an absolute prerequisite for achieving the mission task. You must invest in the social capital.
If you ignore that relationship layer, you're guaranteed to get non-commitment.
Or worse, passive resistance or just superficial compliance. And public criticism of a collectivist leader or subordinate can be a catastrophic error. It causes a complete loss of face and can end the relationship instantly.
Let's move on. Dimension 4 is masculinity versus femininity. This is about societal values, not individuals.
Correct. Masculine cultures emphasize achievement, assertiveness, material success, and competition. They often favor large, robust military forces.
Whereas feminine cultures place a relative emphasis on interpersonal harmony, cooperation, modesty, and quality of life.
Right. They often favor peace support or humanitarian missions. Understanding where your partner nations fall on this scale influences how you structure rewards, how conflicts are handled, confrontation versus compromise, and just the general organizational environment.
And finally, we have the 5th dimension, long-term versus short-term orientation.
This one is partially based on Confucian values, and it addresses time horizons. It focuses on the degree to which a culture embraces future-oriented values like perseverance and thrift over values tied to the past and present, like tradition and fulfilling social obligations immediately.
And that's critical when you're talking about strategic endurance or long-term operations. A short-term oriented culture might be great for rapid intervention, but struggle with a protracted commitment.
Precisely.
Okay, this cultural map is incredibly detailed, but let me challenge this for a second. We know that professional military organizations impose their own strong organizational culture. Does this national-level analysis still hold true when you're dealing with, say, highly trained special operations forces who have a common culture that cuts across national lines?
That is a crucial high-level question. And while that professional organizational culture, the shared values and norms within a military branch, it does moderate national differences, the sources suggest the national culture remains the foundation.
So it's the default setting.
It's the default setting. The study cited in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization reports applied these dimensions to specific military contexts, like analyzing cadet officers in 18 countries. The research suggests that national culture dictates the unconscious responses, especially under stress. The organizational culture is a veneer of professionalism laid over that foundation.
So even the most integrated staff officer will revert to their national baseline, say, high power distance or high uncertainty avoidance, when the situation gets stressful, ambiguous, or politically charged.
Exactly. The commander has to know the default setting of their partners. The analysis specifically suggests that power distance and uncertainty avoidance are conceptually useful for grasping those national cognitive differences. These aren't just academic concepts, they are the commander's cultural warning flags and guidance system.
Okay, let's transition from that cultural map to the practical application of it all. The art of actually leading a multinational force.
Right.
And since we've established that traditional legal command is often diluted, we have to start by clarifying the fundamental distinction between command and leadership in this environment.
This distinction, and it's outlined so clearly in the human factors and medicine research, is the single most important concept for a multinational commander to internalize. Command is rooted in law.
It's legal authority.
It's legal authority. The commander has the legal responsibility to direct the actions of subordinates who are subject to a code of service discipline. It flows from rank and appointment. It's binding.
But leadership operates on a totally different plane.
It does. Leadership doesn't always include a legal foundation. It might be based entirely on personal authority, credibility, earned respect, charisma. In multinational operations, commanders often must exercise pure leadership influence, persuasion, consensus building when dealing with groups or individuals who are not in their formal legal chain of command.
You're leading by persuasion, not by prerogative. Which brings us back to that core strategic goal. Achieving commitment versus settling for compliance.
Exactly. How does a commander ensure the mission is internalized by forces whose ultimate loyalty is, well, elsewhere?
And Field Manual 316 argues that to get to that commitment, a commander has to use social, emotional, and cultural intelligence.
The commander must be both a diplomat and a warrior. The manual states clearly that achieving commitment requires building mutual rapport and respect. You have to act as a political broker as much as a tactical leader.
That sounds incredibly taxing. You're managing national expectations, not just battlefield movements.
It is. The manual lists a number of key intangible considerations that guide the successful commander, and if you ignore them, you risk mission failure.
And these are things like rapport, respect, deep knowledge of partners.
Team building, patience, trust, and a shared understanding. If you fail to cultivate these, orders might be complied with superficially, but they'll be undermined by a lack of real commitment, by delay, or by the application of national caveats at the worst possible moment.
The Human Factors in Medicine report gives some practical guidelines here. It emphasizes that negotiation is commonplace. You said command often happens by discussion.
Yes, and we need to look at that trade-off. It may seem inefficient, and it certainly slows down the initial planning. But the report implies the alternative issuing rapid orders that ignore cultural and political constraints is fatal.
Because it results in non-commitment.
Right. Leaders have to consciously choose to spend that time achieving consensus. They must not assume their national way of war is the only way. And crucially, they have to establish a common sense of purpose, that unity of effort, and a common operating procedure when shared doctrine is lacking. That written procedure becomes the agreed-upon rulebook.
Let's focus on those two main intangibles you mentioned, rapport and respect. They seem like the cornerstones for overcoming those sovereignty constraints.
They are. And rapport, as defined in the Field Manual, is a personal and direct relationship. You establish it by first showing a genuine effort to understand your partner's customs, their personalities, their capabilities, their political ambitions, their sensitivities.
So if you know a partner has high uncertainty avoidance, you structure your planning meetings to provide exceptionally detailed guidance up front. That's building rapport through adaptation.
Precisely. You're showing respect for their organizational needs. And respect itself is just non-negotiable. The manual stresses that a lack of genuine respect, even unintentional slights, leads directly to friction and risks mission failure.
And that means including all partners in planning, no matter how small their contingent.
Yes, and carefully considering their opinions, their national honor, and their reputation when you're assigning missions.
I can see how respecting national honor, which can be a very high concept collectivist ideal, is far more important than any tactical gain.
It is. The goal is a profound psychological shift. You have to move beyond just doing things with allies to truly viewing the operation from the perspective of being an ally. This is why team-building activities are so important. They reinforce the idea that all forces are operating as one team.
We focused heavily on those intangible human factors: culture, rapport, trust. Now let's pivot to the more concrete requirements for modern coalition warfare, which is interoperability.
Right. Field Manual 316 defines this as the ability for forces to act together coherently, effectively, and efficiently to achieve their objectives.
And interoperability is the physical and procedural mechanism that lets that cultural alignment we just talked about actually translate into combat power.
It is, and the sources make it clear it's much more than just compatible radios. To be effective, commanders have to manage three distinct dimensions of interoperability at the same time: human, procedural, and technical.
Okay, let's start with the foundation again, the human dimension.
This is the absolute baseline. It focuses on cultivating trust, clarifying the commander's priorities, and shared training and education. This dimension builds the mutual understanding and respect that are fundamental to achieving unity of effort.
And the manual says new coalitions should prioritize this dimension first.
They should, because the procedural and technical solutions will absolutely fail without a basis of human trust. And the primary tool for bridging those human and cultural barriers is the continuous exchange of highly competent liaison officers.
These officers are more than just messengers.
Oh, much more. They're interpreters of doctrine and intent, not just language. They are the human solution to the cultural challenge.
Okay, next up is the procedural dimension. This is where national legal systems meet military planning.
Exactly. This dimension focuses on creating harmony across doctrine, standardized operating procedures, tactics, and governance standards. But this is also where deep difficulties emerge because of that sovereignty constraint.
Can you give us an example of that procedural difficulty?
Well, the source material explicitly notes that command authority definitions are not internationally standardized. For instance, in one nation, tactical control might mean full operational command. In another, it may still require referencing back to national headquarters for approval on any action involving risks.
So the definition of authority has to be modified for every single operation.
Every single one. The Research Task Group reports even point out that within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization itself, there's sometimes a lack of consensus on whether a commander can act if something isn't explicitly forbidden. This ambiguity forces the commander right back into that realm of leadership by discussion.
And finally, the technical dimension. This is the one that always seems to get the most funding.
It does, because in some ways it's the easiest to solve if you have the resources and, critically, the trust. This is your communications, information systems, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
The things that enable a common operational picture.
Right. But you hit the wall of the human dimension again. You can have the most compatible network in the world, but if the intelligence chief doesn't trust the partner nation's security protocols, they won't share the sensitive data. Interoperability requires both technology and trust.
So to give this some structure, Field Manual 316 details 4 specific levels of interoperability.
Yes. These levels define the scope of collaboration you can actually achieve. At the bottom, you have level 0, not interoperable. This means there's no interoperability whatsoever. Formations have to operate completely independently.
Then you move up to level 1, which is deconflicted.
Right. Here, units can coexist, but they don't interact in the fight. They just have minimal procedures so they don't accidentally interfere with each other.
You're basically just preventing friendly fire. The bar is still pretty low.
It is. It's safe cohabitation.
Well,
Level 2 is compatible. Here, units can actively interact in the same area toward a common goal. They have similar processes. You've achieved basic teamwork.
and the goal, the standard for true coalition warfare, is level 3, integrated.
This is where the forces become network-enabled and truly symbiotic. They can integrate upon arrival, share fire support systems, share sensitive intelligence, and operate effectively as part of the formations, not just alongside them. Achieving level 3 requires sustained investment and mastery of all 3 dimensions: human, procedural, and technical, all working in concert.
Moving into the actual mechanics of command, let's look at how multinational forces structure their command and control. The field manual knows that since no single structure fits all situations, several types have evolved.
That's right. The structure chosen always has to reflect the mission, the number of nations involved, the trust level, and the political mandate.
Let's start with the most robust structure, the one that tries to solve the sovereignty problem by formal agreement, the integrated command structure.
This is designed to provide genuine unity of command, like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization structure. Subordinate commands and staffs are integrated, and national forces report directly to a single commander. It benefits from long-term common doctrine and shared training.
But in an ad hoc coalition, especially one led by a major power, the lead nation command structure is probably more common.
It is, and the United States frequently assumes this role. One nation provides the bulk of the forces, the infrastructure, and the staff leadership. It's often preferred for efficient command and control.
But to avoid the perception of it being a unilateral action.
You need staff augmentation from other nations to supplement the lead nation staff. This ensures the headquarters represents the entire coalition and gives you visibility into partner capabilities and concerns.
Then there's the structure most planners try to avoid.
Yeah.
The parallel command structure.
It's the most susceptible to friction and delay. In this structure, no single coalition commander exists. Multinational leaders just coordinate among participants, and national forces remain under independent command chains.
So they require complex coordination centers just to achieve basic unity of effort.
Right. They operate at a very low level of interoperability. It's a very cumbersome reactive model.
And finally, you have the combination structure, which is just a pragmatic mix of all of the above.
Yes, often used in temporary coalitions to address specific mission needs.
But regardless of the structure, the field manual highlights the critical role of liaisons. We've mentioned them, but they're clearly fundamental to command and control itself.
Liaison is vital. It's what transforms mere coordination into real collaboration. It builds confidence, fosters deep understanding, enhances mutual trust, and develops teamwork. The sources emphasize that liaison officers supply significant information about subordinate force readiness, national constraints, information that might not be shared over formal channels.
So who should these liaison officers be? They can't just be a placeholder.
They must be the best officers and non-commissioned officers a nation can provide. Their quality directly affects operations and the overall perception of the sending nation's forces. They have to know their own nation's doctrine, organization, material, language, and, crucially, the national interests and political red lines of their parent command.
I recall the source material noting the effectiveness of special operations forces in this role.
They are highly effective, yes, due to their language capabilities and cultural training. However, the manual notes they shouldn't be the primary means for enduring liaison. They're too scarce a resource.
Let's talk about how this integration affects the staff, especially within a lead nation headquarters. The chief of staff has to manage officers from a multitude of nations.
Absolutely. The chief of staff has to place special emphasis on training and coordinating this multinational staff, ensuring everyone understands the common operating procedures. And we can look at two specific staff sections where this becomes critical, starting with the assistant chief of staff, intelligence, the G2.
And the G2's primary challenge is the foreign disclosure problem managing what classified information can be released to whom.
Exactly. It's a complex legal and political minefield. And the field manual provides a strong warning here. Failure to proactively use partners' intelligence capabilities or to disseminate their products in a timely manner is seen as keeping intelligence in reserve. It can severely insult the partner and cause a breakdown in trust.
So the G2 has to constantly balance intelligence security against the desperate need for a shared understanding.
That is the daily tension of the job. And for the Assistant Chief of Staff Operations, the G3, the challenge is similar, but focused on action. The G3 has to meticulously examine the rules of engagement to ensure a collective understanding.
And given what we said about high uncertainty avoidance, that ROE document has to be absolutely clear and comprehensive.
Precisely. The G3 also has to plan for the required density and location of liaisons and interpreters, ensuring communication doesn't fail at the critical point of execution.
Which brings us back to translators and interpreters. Their importance can't be overstated. They're so much more than human dictionaries.
They are critical staff multipliers. They're scarce, and they require a long lead time to deploy. The core issue is technical and doctrinal expertise. Very few translators can cross both the language barriers and the complex doctrinal boundaries effectively.
So ensuring a term like mission command is not just translated linguistically, but understood culturally and procedurally.
Exactly. Planners have to determine these requirements early and invest in training interpreters to be deeply familiar with technical military terms and procedures. Word choice and mannerisms convey command intent, and that has to be exactly right when you're discussing operational risks or strategic goals.
We've traveled a long way, from the deep cultural dimensions of Hofstede, that unconscious national software, all the way to the concrete command structures required to execute a mission. Let's recap the journey.
Well, I think the most essential insight from all these sources is that success in multinational operations is predicated less on the legal power of technical command authority.
Which is already reduced by national sovereignty.
Right. It's far more about sociocultural influence and trust. That human dimension has to be cultivated first, always. That influence has to operate on all three planes: human, procedural, and technical.
And the human dimension is the true foundation. If you don't build trust and rapport, the best technical equipment and the most detailed written procedures are just rendered irrelevant.
Absolutely. The senior commander, much like Lieutenant General Slim in Burma, has to operate continuously as both a diplomat and a warrior. Their mission is to constantly assess if the political agendas, the national caveats, and the deep-seated cultural constraints of their partners allow for true commitment, or if they must struggle to compel mere compliance.
And when that formal command authority is limited, leadership through rapport, cultural empathy, patience, and shared understanding becomes the single deciding factor for mission success.
It does. It's a non-negotiable starting point for any successful multinational leader. You must know your audience before you can lead them.
Which brings us to a final and I think a really provocative thought that we can pull from this source material, specifically regarding the longevity of this challenge.
The research on cultural dimensionalization notes that influences like new technologies, advanced communications, artificial intelligence, things like that, they tend to affect all countries without necessarily changing their relative cultural ranking.
Wait, say that again. You're saying the underlying cultural dynamics, the power distance, the individualism, the uncertainty avoidance, they remain relatively stable even as technology modernizes and everyone gets the same equipment.
Precisely. If cultures change, they tend to change together, maintaining their relative positions on that dimensional map. Therefore, a commander's deep cultural comprehension today, the knowledge that one nation prioritizes procedure while another prioritizes relationship, that knowledge will likely remain valid and essential even in the face of future technological modernization.
So the core challenge of multinational leadership is fundamentally timeless.
It is. You can digitize a map, but you cannot automate rapport, respect, or the trust required to truly integrate disparate forces.
That's a powerful thought to leave you with. The human factor will always be the variable that matters most, no matter how advanced the technology gets.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into leading multinational operations. We'll see you next time.